My image defines my worth.
I must stay positive.
I'm fine.
No one cares.
I am unlovable.
I must do it
My
alone.
story isn't important.
It's okay to be honest. I am enough.
Somebody cares.
I do not have to do this alone.
I am imperfectly perfect.
My beauty comes from within.
My voice matters.
I am loved. It's okay to not be okay.
My story has value.
So today we're going to break down the lie of I'm too young or I'm too old. And I think reality is we could really break down any phrase that starts with I'm too this or that, right? But I think one of the things with this conversation is that I love the fact that we're up here as youth in the community of varying ages and saying like, hey, here's a lie I can tell myself. We can, I think at times we can like point to others and maybe even blame others for that, but I think there's something to be said about us seeing that as a lie that we maybe have embodied as well. And I think to get us started, some of us have talked about this in various places in various ways, but one of the things for me that I think a lot of people that have heard me in the context of like St. Luke's youth director is a lot of times I'll say the youth aren't just the church of the future, the youth are the church of now. And I say that a lot. What I don't always share, because it's a little more vulnerable, is that actually started because when I started in youth ministry, I tended to be kind of looked over for things because I was a really young youth director. And sometimes it's little things like, oh, you have to have like an adult in the congregation rent the vehicle for the next trip because you're too young, or little things like that. And like that's reality of life, right? So that's the thing that I could blame that, or I could acknowledge that I embodied that as feeling like I wasn't good enough in that moment, right? And the reality is I did embody it that way versus being like, hey, it's factual. Like it says 25 and I'm 20, like, right? But yet there was still a piece that I embodied that as, oh, well, I'm too young. So can I really be like a real youth director or whatever that is? And realizing that I could make the choice to blame that situation, or I could also see where like I believed that for myself.
I love that, like, young people are, I mean, I hear that a lot, that, like, young people are the future, and, I mean, it is true, but, like, that, like, we are now, too, like, we can make change now. I mean, I was talking to you guys a little earlier, a few days ago, too, about a class I was taking about restorative justice, and it links to, like, a lot of different things. We were talking about that, like, how do we go from here? What do we do now? And a lot of that comes down to, like, a lot of people feel like, oh, we're too young to do anything, and, you know, these are global issues, like, we're, what, like, 12 and 17, like, what do we do? But I think, like, looking for, there are always small things that we can, like, put into our, like, daily lives that we can change that start to make an impact. Because it makes an impact on another person, and that person starts doing it, and, you know, it just is like a chain reaction.
You know, we, at a youth group level, we joke about this sometime where I'm always like, oh man, I'm getting old. But like, reality is like, I am older than y'all, right? And there are scenarios where I may not understand it the way you do, or I may not think of the answers that you think of in these moments. And, to understand too, like on the other side of that, for people that could be like my position or that principal's position is like, we're not too disconnected or too old to make this change. We actually have responsibility to each other to listen to understand and listen to hear each other, and change can come from that too.
That's so true. That like, you're never too, I don't think anyone's ever too old to like try to like, you know, join an idea or like try to make change. I mean, a lot of people think like, oh, you know, like my like being an activist days are done, or, you know, like, oh, it is how it is. Like, what am I gonna do? I mean, to your point, I mean, I think any point in your life you're able to make a difference and change. So,
Yeah, no, Elise, I think you were going to say.
To go on the other part of the question about being older, well, we already kind of talked about it, but being older, I also think that some things that you think you're too old is like part of like growing up. You're like, oh, I'm too old for this now. Like it's hard to like realize and come to that realization, like I'm too old for this. Like not too old for this, but I've kind of grown out of this. And you're like, I'm growing up and I'm getting older, which can be really hard to face and really kind of scary as something that huge.
Mm-hmm. And I think one side of that, if I may kind of push us this way, is I think it's important we hear that like we have passions and like this lie can get in the way of us acting on those passions or creating change. Then there's also the side of how this lie kind of affects us in the way we see or value ourselves. How does that feel?
I think that, with like a lot of things is that for me, I'm going to know less math than someone your age. I'm not going to have as many experiences as someone who's 5, 10, 20 years older than me. And that's obvious. And they are smarter in some ways. But I think when it comes to mental health, I don't think you're ever too young to experience that. I don't think, when you're in elementary school or middle school, you ever should explain your feelings and someone be like, well, you're only in 6th grade or 7th grade or whatever. So it'll get better, it's just like a little phase. I think, it's actually really important because we're shaping ourselves for the future. And so it's really important to acknowledge that mental health is a thing in younger kids and to battle that and work on that so that when we are older, then that's less of one of our biggest struggles.
well, and if I can butt in a little bit, I mean, that's a great example. I mean, we need to be there for everybody going through stuff. I mean, that like acknowledging that, I mean, like young people deal with like mental health issues. I mean, it's very clear now in like the recent future, and being able to provide things, I mean, like this, where like kids dealing with stuff and being able to have a conversation and kind of like destigmatize like mental health issues and like try to get to the root of some of these problems and provide help for people is like gonna be lifesavers in most cases. So
Yeah, and I'm glad that we have this platform with Jay and Doug putting this on, and we can get this out here.
And like I think a lot of times people are surprised, I'm talking about something that I'm struggling with in my life, and sometimes people are like, oh, like, you know about that? And I'm like, yeah.
Yeah, I'm living it, right?
Yeah. Like,
I'm going more on the mental health part of it. When you're a young kid trying to reach out for help to an adult, it can be really challenging for them to honestly believe you, because they're like, you're too young, you're not old enough to experience that yet, when that's very much so not true. Mental health develops at different ages for everybody. It's not the same for everybody. It's all in different forms. So when you're a kid and you're trying to reach out for help, it's almost like you're screaming to this person, like I'm putting on my brave face, like I'm reaching out for help, and they're not listening.
well, and that can kind of like put people down too if you just hear like, oh, you're too like, or even then like you're too young to understand this, or you're too young to understand like whatever you're doing. And I think that's where it's like, oh, well, if people, like you were saying earlier, like if we're living it, I mean, we need to accept. And I think like that's where people can get really put down and not want to like share if they're just being told that they're too young or too old,
Yeah, I think that's a great point, and something that we definitely can continue to learn from each other on too. That when we hear somebody say that they are feeling this way, or this is where they're at, that is how they feel. So thank you for this conversation, for opening up about these topics and continuing that on. Everybody, thank you for our continued conversations as we're here on day 6 of 10 for 10. Thank you for engaging through this video on this conversation about how sometimes we feel too young or too old. This is a topic that I think no matter who you are or where you're at, you can relate to in some way. And I ask that we continue to have these conversations in our communities, our workplaces, wherever that is, that you can continue to kind of break down these barriers that may make us feel like we're less than. You can follow the link below for more resources about this topic, and also for more resources, continued resources, knowing that there is always help available, and it's never a weakness to receive help and to receive professional help as well. So we look forward to continuing this conversation, and tomorrow we'll come for day 7 of 10 for 10, and we'll keep these conversations going and breaking down the silence and stigma around mental health. Thank you for being a part of that.